Hello and welcome everyone to the Garden Hour with MU Extension. My name's Debi Kelly. I'm in Jefferson County. We are very, very happy that you all are with us today. As usual, we enjoy answering your questions. A lot of questions we may not know the answer. At least I will admit I may not know the answer, but I love my job because then I can go research that answer and try to figure it out and then get back with you and answering it. So I am continuously on a learning path. And that's one of the reasons why I love my job, love the Garden Hour, and love sharing that knowledge and information with you. So we're very happy to have you with us today. So let's look at the map. We have another new opening, unfortunately. Robert Balick down in the southwestern part of the state has taken a new position outside of the university. So we're sad to see him go. From what I understand, the position is posted and is open. So if you know of someone that has a master's degree that would enjoy working with the public and answering, let them know about that position. Boone County is also open, and that they're accepting applications at this point right now as well. And our recent hires have been Todd Higgins up in the St. Joseph area in the yellow. We've hired Gwen Funk, so she has those very northwestern counties. And then Ms. Manoj Chetri, who used to have this whole area of gray and light blue. His area has now gotten smaller, so it's just the light blue. Our names are there, our emails are there, so you can grab the email of the county that you're in. If you're in a county where we are open, by all means, contact one of the others of us. Even though those are the counties we serve in, we do go across county lines. And some of us have an expertise in one particular area of horticulture over the other. So don't feel obligated to specifically contact your person, although we like that the best, but we'll always find someone who can answer a question for you. What I'd like to go ahead and do right now is to let you guys know that unfortunately Zack is not with us today. He did do a recording for us because he wants to make sure that everybody gets their information. So we're going to go ahead and put that up. And while Jared is putting up that recording, I want to let you know that Kathy has changed her name to Ask Questions Here. So if you've got a question, go ahead in the chat box, private chat her, leave your email address. It's only going to go to Kathy. And if we don't answer it, then we'll be more than happy to have someone get back in touch with you. So Jared, let's go ahead and hear what Zack has to say for us.
Hello, everyone. This is our weekly weather summary for Missouri. I want to start today by following up from last week and looking back at August for our state climate summary. So if you were able to attend last week, we were looking at a few locations and seeing how some of the temperatures and precipitation compared to normal. This week, I want to show some of the statewide values as well here. So some of this analysis is from the National Center for Environmental Information, and we can look at rankings of temperature and precipitation all the way back to 1895, so based on 129 years of climate data. And so looking at our statewide averages, our August temperatures were really close to normal like we talked about last week. This was the 54th warmest August on record. But our precipitation was notable. So we've talked a lot about all of the heavy precipitation that fell in early August, and now we see that statewide, we ended up with actually the 6th wettest August on record, which is a little counterintuitive considering that we are still in a drought. But if you look at the map here on the right, you can see that a lot of that precipitation and some of those high values were really concentrated in an area from northwest to southeast. And so where you see these counties that are shaded in the blues, those are going to have higher rankings for a wetter August. And in fact, I've included a table here with some values as well. We saw 3 counties in southeastern Missouri which actually had their wettest August ever on record, as well as 5 additional counties that recorded their second wettest August. So really anomalous amounts of precipitation that occurred in those locations. And so when we actually go back and look at our 3 months for the summer, June, July, and August, we actually see that our temperatures were again close to normal. It was our 47th warmest summer, and it was actually our 49th wettest summer as well. And so again, thinking about especially June and the first half of July, this was one of the driest periods in the state. But when we also consider our extremely wet August, it kind of balances, and we actually see precipitation that's close to normal over that 3-month period. And so if we look at the year to date, though, we do see some trends that are a little bit more clear. To date, this is the 11th warmest year on record for Missouri, and it's our 54th driest, which again doesn't seem to capture the drought well. But if we were to narrow that period to just a 5-month period from April to August, it has been our 15th driest period during that time. And so with 129 years of data, 15th driest would really contextualize this drought as kind of a 10-year drought event. And so here just showing the county maps for that precipitation rank from April to August, and we do see that there's even some hot spots that have been even drier when broken down to a county level. But what's been interesting is we've also been looking at some stations around the state to try to get an idea of just how dry they are. And sometimes some of the state statistics don't do a good job, but if we go to the local level, we can really see the drought. And so here in Columbia, this is a graph from our weather station at Sanborn Field on campus. And so this data goes back to 1997. And what this is showing is the green line and the area shaded under it is our running cumulative accumulation of rainfall for 2023. So we can see that our rainfall continues to increase throughout the year. And then we see this solid line here, which represents normal. So this would be the average precipitation until that date. And so you can see that really since April 1st, our green line for 2023 has really diverged from normal, and we've become well below normal as we proceeded throughout the summer. Just for some context, I've also plotted 3 other colors here, which are other drought notes of recent memory. So 2012, 2018, and 2022 were all considered drought years. And what's interesting is really as of September, our green line here is the driest of any of these years. So this just shows that as of right now at this station going back to 1997, this is actually our driest year to date on record there, even compared to the other drought years. So very, very dry here in Columbia, and there's many stations that we're seeing like this across the state. And so just for context, right now as of today, we are 12.5 inches below normal for the year, so a long way to go to pick up on those precipitation deficits. And so I think when we factor in the fact that August was a really wet month, and it was a wet month in Columbia as well, some of these deficits are large and are going to take multiple months of precipitation to really recover from some of the long-term drought deficits here. So when thinking more recently over the past 2 weeks, even though we did have that wet August, we've really dried out here. So on the left is our 14-day precipitation, which essentially goes back to the beginning of September or August 30th here. We do see some rainfall, but the same map plotted on the right that shows our departure from normal, we see a lot of yellows and oranges across the state, showing that over the past 2 weeks, we've been drier, and in some locations, much drier than normal. And so as a result, we do still see drought across a good portion of Missouri. And on the right is our U.S. Drought Monitor change map from the past 2 weeks. And so where you see yellow, that's a 1-category degradation, green's an improvement. So given the lack of rainfall over the past 2 weeks, we have seen some additional degradation of drought conditions across the state. So looking forward and looking ahead at our forecast, is there any relief from the drought ahead? Well, unfortunately, a very, very similar pattern to what we've seen the past few Wednesdays. It seems like the past few Wednesdays in September, we've had high pressure moving in with drier conditions, and that's exactly what we're looking at this week. And so we received some rainfall Monday and into Monday evening, and this was due to a large cold front that moved across the United States. And so this is as of Tuesday evening. We can see that cold front's now well to our southeast with all the precipitation associated with it. And moving into Missouri is another area of surface high pressure, which is going to bring a lot of dry air to our area. And so looking here from the Weather Prediction Center, this is a 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast from this Wednesday into next Wednesday, and it looks very dry for the state. So right here is a forecast for no precipitation for much of the state. And so what's interesting about this map is air rotates clockwise around areas of low pressure, and we can almost see the precipitation rotating along this area of high pressure centered over Missouri and other parts of the Midwest. So really not good news for the moisture that we desperately need right now. Now, what high pressure and dry conditions are good for are excellent weather conditions. So looking for the remainder of this week, it's going to be outstanding weather, really cooler temperatures than normal. So right now, our high temperatures are typically in the lower 80s across the state, but we'll see highs topping out in the middle to upper 70s throughout the rest of the week. Lows in the 50s. Some outlying areas might touch the upper 40s as well, and dew points very low. It's a dry air mass, and so very comfortable fall-like weather. Now this weekend, I know I showed a map that showed no precipitation, but there is a small rain chance that might occur this weekend with a weaker cold front that could move through sometime Friday night into Saturday. On the right, this is our from the National Weather Service, a probability of precipitation for 12 hours ending on Saturday at 7 a.m. And so this was actually the highest percentage of or probability of precipitation that the Weather Service is forecasting during this time period. And you can see it's a little hard to see the numbers on this map. But percentages in Missouri anywhere from 10 to 30%. So not a lot of confidence that we will get some rainfall this weekend, but maybe some clouds and a few showers during that time frame. We'll see similar temperatures, but next week, after this disturbance moves through over the weekend, we see another dry pattern and the chances for a warm up at least back into the 80s next week. And so I want to show the Climate Prediction Center outlooks here. So the 6 to 10 day outlook is going to be valid for most of next week. And guidance is showing that temperatures are likely to be above normal next week. Not a lot of confidence in the precipitation forecast, but there is a wet signal, or at least leaning wetter in that period. But when we get to late next week and into later in September, there's actually quite a bit of confidence for this warm up to stick around. So right now, from the Climate Prediction Center, we're looking at up to 70% chance of above normal temperatures in that week 2 period, which for that far out is a lot of confidence, and not as much confidence in the precipitation, but again, a wet signal. So based on this, we can really expect September to finish out probably pretty warm, and hopefully we see some wetter conditions next week when we go through the summary then. So thanks for having me today. Sorry I couldn't attend in person again, but here's my contact information. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
And I would naturally be saying thanks, Zack, for being with us, but he knows that and we appreciate him, and we'll be happy to have him back next week live with us. So we're excited for that piece. What I'd like to do is go ahead and turn it over to Kelly, who's going to be the moderator for us for today. So Kelly, let's get us jump started.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get into our questions for today. And the first question that we had come in was about creeping Charlie, ground ivy, and this person has had a big problem with it taking over their yard and flower beds. And Donna is going to talk to us about that and how to control it. Donna?
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So I talk to a lot of people that deal with Creeping Charlie, and so I sort of titled this "At War with Creeping Charlie," because Creeping Charlie isn't always something that is easily controlled. It's a battle, and it's something that you got to keep on top of, because it can quickly get out of control and it goes haywire. And so I'm going to talk about some control strategies, which once again, I said, it's a battle. So, you have to think about this a lot and how you're going to approach it. It is also called ground ivy, and a lot of it has to do with it's because it grows along the ground, and it's a lot like ivy in the fact that it's viney and it puts roots down at each of those inner nodes. And so it can really fasten itself down to the ground. I've had situations where it was easy to pull, such out of mulch or out of loose ground. And then there's other situations where I've had a horrible time in getting it up. And that is when it has really locked down and really dug its roots in. And so it's hard to pull. And so we see it differently in different environments. So the vegetable garden may be different than the lawn, and the lawn may be different than, a mulched path or the mulched landscape. So just keep that in mind. It is a low growing aggressive perennial, which means you're going to have a lot of growth the bulk of the year. It does slow down like all the others. It tends to be warmer seasons, so it tends to slow down in the fall and in the winter. It really favors shaded areas, wet areas, but I will tell you, I've seen it in a lot of sunny areas. So don't just think it's only in one area. It can grow just about anywhere. It does have a square stem, so it's in that mint family, and it does put off a small odor if it's crushed or if the leaves are rolled. And like I said, it really is a problem because it puts down roots at every node, and that's what causes it to thrive so well. And so, like I said, it can be easy or it can be tough. The big thing is to take a step back and evaluate your situation, evaluate the environment, evaluate how the plant is reacting to that environment that it's in. Take a look at those landscape beds. You want to take a look and make sure, how's the light going? Because sometimes it's just a matter of increasing the light and not watering as much. And sometimes it will stay at bay. Take a look at the fertility in all those areas and the pH, because it can be a worse problem if you're, fertilizing. And so always try to keep the fertilizer in check and only fertilize according to a soil test. Try not to go overboard, and take a look at the pH and just make sure everything's in check. On turf, if it's growing a lot in your lawn, take a look at the health of your lawn. If that grass is not doing well and the canopy's thin, you might consider resowing seed or try to get on a regular fertilizer program to help strengthen it. You might get that soil test and evaluate for, once again, pH and nutrients, because once again, you want that thriving, healthy grass to be able to compete with something like ground ivy. And also consider that mowing height. If you're scalping the ground or mowing it where it's only 1.5 inches or 2 inches tall, that's when the ivy tends to take over. So try to raise those blades a little on that mower and try to give it a 3-inch mowing height. And that way that grass has a bit of a canopy. And it might help it to combat it or be competitive. And then on the vegetable garden, I always try to encourage people, mulch those areas and get that soil covered, because that's where that ground ivy will thrive, is bare ground. Once again, that's also the case with the turf being thin. That bare ground provides an awesome environment for that ground ivy to thrive. And so those are just some things to keep in mind. It's going to be an ongoing battle, so it's not a one-time fix, unfortunately. I would start out with hand pulling, and if you cannot seem to manage it at that point, you might consider coming out with the herbicides, and herbicides are a tool. I know there are some gardeners out there that are more organic, and that is great. But just realize that there are times when a herbicide could easily make your life a little easier. If you want to stay with the organic way, you want to stick with the hand pulling and using mechanical tools such as hose and different tools that can help you remove it. If you're going to go the chemical route, the main ones that we really focus on with ground ivy is 2,4-D. and a combination of 2,4-D mixed with MCPP or MCPA. And those two ingredients can help the 2,4-D actually be a better product, act better, and get those harder to remove species. The other one that you might be able to look for is triclopyr. Hard to pronounce, but you can identify it on active ingredients on a label. And so, look for that key active ingredient. There has been some research out there that shows that borax, yes, it's a laundry detergent, that borax can help in controlling it. It is an organic, well, I shouldn't call it organic. It's not deemed organic. Let's say it is a less herbicide-ish type way. Let's put it that way. And you mix 10 ounces of borax in 4 ounces of hot water to dissolve it. And then you mix it in with 2.5 gallons of water. Why is this toxic to ground ivy? It's the boron in it. It is sensitive to boron. Now, there are limitations. You can only spray this about twice and then you're done. So if you notice in those 2 times, it does not work on the ground ivy, you're going to have to do something else, because they have seen a difference in the type of soil. So there's a correlation there. So try the borax for a more earth-friendly type control. If that doesn't work, then jump to that 2,4-D or the triclopyr. The link on the bottom is will also be put in the chat box. It is the one where I found a lot of this information. 2,4-D can be sprayed in the fall. It can be sprayed in the spring. The big thing is you want to avoid the summertime. The summer is when that plant is going gangbusters. It is growing by leaps and bounds, and you will not affect it with a herbicide at that point. A lot of the guides say to hit it in the fall with 2,4-D and then turn around and hit it in the spring again. And the 2-time hit should knock it back quite a bit. Now, the question that came in asked about the difference between the 2,4-D and 2,4-D amine and ester. There's 2 different formulations of 2,4-D. There's amine and there's ester. In this case, the 2,4-D amine is the one that you want because it is going to be less volatile in a landscape. Volatile means that it won't pick back up in the air and that it won't drift as bad. And so you want the amine because it's going to be less dangerous to your landscape plants. Not saying it won't be totally safe, but it will have a less of a chance of if you use larger droplet size and you watch the wind speeds and you spray it on a still day, it's not going to travel as much to your other landscape plants. Always with any herbicide, you have a chance of damaging other plants, and always remember that. And when you use a herbicide, always read that label. That label is the law. And that way you can find out what the precautions are, the safety for you as well as other plants. And you also find out what the correct dosages are, how many teaspoons to a gallon of water. And just remember, a healthy landscape, a healthy lawn, a healthy garden maintained with a regime of healthy practices, watering, weeding, fertilization, the cultural things that we do is the strongest defense against a lot of these weeds. And so if we can practice those better cultural habits, we can get a better handle on a lot of these weeds that are hard to control. Okay, back to you, Kelly.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to talk about, let me get this pulled up. We are going to talk about wintering your garden tools. Okay, all right, can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so we had a Master Gardener class last night. This was such a fun class. We got together and talked about winterizing your garden tools. We talked about winterizing lawnmowers, sanitizing flower pots, and how to care for your tools. So I thought caring for tools would be a great thing to talk about today. So, if you own any garden tools such as loppers or hand pruners or shovels or hoes, you know that these can kind of be an investment and they can be a little bit pricey, and you want to make them last as long as they possibly can, so that you can get a lot of good years of use out of it. So, I'm going to give you a few tips to do that today. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to clean your tools. So you want to get off any soil or organic matter. You can use soap and water. Of course, you want to let it dry well, but use soap and water to get that off. Use a wire brush, use steel wool, whatever you can, but the goal is just to have a nice clean surface. For if you have anything sticky like pine on your tools, you can dip a rag in paint thinner and clean it that way. Just make sure that you follow safety precautions on the paint thinner can, but that can get that sticky stuff off of there. The next thing you want to do is sharpen your tools. And so always wear protective goggles when you're sharpening and dealing with metal. File in one direction, and I'm going to show you some different ways to do sharpening here in the next slide, but file in one direction, not back and forth, okay? 5 to 20 strokes of the sharpening tool should be fine per edge. You don't want to do any more than that. Tools don't have to have a knife-like edge. You want it to be a little bit thicker so they can handle the stress of just using the tools in the garden. I have had some comments about disassembling tools before you sharpen and clean them, and certainly that's an option, but only do that if you're comfortable reassembling them, and that would be me. I would not be comfortable reassembling, so just keep that in mind as well. So here's some photos from last night from our sharpening station. The picture here on the left just shows some hand tools that can be used to sharpen hand pruners or whatever you might have. And then the picture here on the right is kind of a grindstone type sharpener as well. And then this was a really interesting one. So this was a drill bit. So you actually get this little bit to put on your drill, and it's just a sharpener for your tools. And you can see here the picture on the right. I've tried to zoom in on that so you can see what the attachment looks like. But this was really cool. You will have to have an anvil or something to hold it, still while you work on it. But I just thought that was a really good way to sharpen tools. So after you have sharpened and after you have cleaned, you want to oil your tools, and you can use any kind of a silicone spray. You can use WD-40 type of a product. And if your tools have wooden handles, this is a good time to treat the wood with linseed oil to kind of condition that wood and to help them to last longer as well. So this is kind of a before and after of what a good cleanup job does, and it really does make a difference. Winter is also a good time to organize your garden tools and be prepared for the spring. There's also often a lot of good sales on garden tools in the winter, so you can kind of inventory what you have and hopefully purchase what you need. I didn't really cover a lot on sanitizing garden tools. We have talked about that in other garden hour segments and probably will again in the future. But today we were mainly wanting to talk about cleaning and just kind of getting your tools ready. I've also had some people ask about storing tools in buckets of sand, kind of like you see here in the photo. And that is a great way throughout the growing season. If you're busy and you don't have time to keep your tools clean, you can kind of stick them down in there, and that helps to loosen debris. It helps to keep everything dry. So just another tool for your arsenal to take care of your tools. Okay, so let me stop sharing there. And next we are going to hear from Kathy on bringing your houseplants in for winter.
Thanks, Kelly. And thanks for the presentation. I learned some things. And let's see. All right. I think I jumped ahead somehow. Let me go back. I'm not sure what happened. well, you're seeing the whole presentation without me having to give it. So that was a good tip on that sand. I never have heard of that. I don't know why. I can't get back to the, oh, there we go. So bringing our houseplants inside, and it is that time of year. And if you could start moving them in slowly right now, you would be ahead of the game. And so when the night temperatures get below 50 degrees is when it's recommended to bring them in. And so from our weather report, it looks like that's what is happening this week. But next week, I think they're going to be, well, they're not going to be below 50 in my area. I'm in the Lexington area. But soon they are going to be, and it is going to be time to bring them in. Another just rule of thumb is to bring them in before the heat's turned on. As you can also start moving them to a more protective area while they're still outside, and then that just helps transition them in, and definitely before threat of frost. And I have, as we all are, we get very busy, and sometimes this isn't the top of the list. And so I get a warning that there's a chance of frost, and I have to move them in quickly. I prefer to be able to start working inside before I start moving them in, so I have a good place for them and I'm ready to go. So one thing you want to make sure you do before you move them inside is to check for pests, mites, aphids, scale, whitefly, mealybug, and ants or more. You'll also want to look for any disease. When you're checking for those pests, check the plant, the container, and the saucer. So the bottom of the container, check everything. And oftentimes a strong stream of water can dislodge those insects. Sometimes not, and you would need to use either rubbing alcohol, horticultural oil, insecticidal soap, or pyrethrum. You can also soak the root ball in lukewarm water for 15 minutes to get the pests to come out. If you do have a plant with a lot of problems or a problem, quarantine that plant before bringing it in if you can, so that if it's anything that's going to spread, you'll nip that in the bud. So before you move them in, this is a good time while you're checking for insects and other pests. Just look at the overall health of the plant. Remove any dead leaves or branches, and trim any overgrown plants, but not more than a third of the plant. You can repot if really needed in the fall. We usually recommend that in the spring, but if it's very root bound, or sometimes the pot has broken, or or you need to divide it, you can repot it. Just try to be careful with the roots. Try to minimize any damage to the roots. Don't overwater, because when we move them inside, they just don't need as much water. And so make sure you don't overwater any that you are moving in, or any that you might have to transplant. And you can, for any of the plants, you can give them one last fertilization. Now, for me, I have to be kind of selective. I've got a lot of plants, and I have to decide what I'm going to bring in this year, what I'm going to give away, what I'm going to take starts of, because I can't possibly bring in all of the annuals. And some of them have just gotten too big, and whether it's an annual or a house plant that I usually bring in, sometimes I do have to divide it because I just don't have the space for it any longer. What I do is I go out and just take cuttings. So coleus, the Swedish ivy, geraniums, philodendron, just whatever you have, different ivies. It also depends on the light and the amount of space you have inside. Some of these I start for other people because they do have a lot more space, or they've got their basement. A friend of mine's got her whole basement set up to take in a lot of house plants, and so she wants cuttings from mine and hers, and she just has a lot of room and it has the setup, so that's really nice for her. once you do bring them inside, look for the best location. In the south and west windows are the best for winter. Clean your windows. That'll really help getting that sunshine in, because it is completely different. The sunlight they receive outside and the sun they get from the inside. Sometimes you can use supplemental light. Like I said, a friend of mine has her basement set up with lights, and you could do that also. It doesn't have to be in a basement. You can do it in your home if you've got the room and the space. Be careful of putting them near vents or drafts. So near a door that's opened a lot, you want to be careful of putting plants there. They do not like drafts, cold or hot. Ideal temperatures for most plants, 60 to 70 degrees. And like I've already mentioned, they need way less water in the winter, and not much fertilization. You can, and I was successful last year in bringing in several lantanas to my unheated garage, and they survived over the winter. And it was important that I kept them moist, but not wet. I didn't water them on a regular basis. You can bring it. So this is lantana. You can do that with geraniums and begonias. You can also do it with the more tropical hibiscus and mandevilla. You can even do it with rosemary and lavender. I'm going to try rosemary inside us. A colleague told me that she brings hers in every year and it survives. So I'm going to find a very, very sunny location for the rosemary and see if I can't keep that alive this year. In the garage, you want to maintain temperatures between 45 and 50 degrees if you can. You do allow the tropicals to go dormant. And like I said, keep the soil slightly moist. If your garage is going to get below 32 to 35, you want to move any herbs inside. All right, that is all I have, Kelly.
All right, thank you. Okay, next we are going to talk about planting trees, and this is such an important topic because it is so important to start with proper tree planting so you don't have issues years down the road. So Debbie is going to talk to us about that.
Thank you, Kelly. So avoiding issues with when you're planting trees is really, really important. And a lot of times the failure of our trees are simply because they were planted inaccurately, which caused a lot of stress on those plants, which caused to have disease or insect issues, and just general decline of the trees as well. So first, let's look at what are some general guidelines for planting. Fall is the best time to plant. The soil is warm, the roots can get really acclimated to the soil and the temperature. Make sure you water, those roots will take, and then they can have good for overwintering if those roots have good growth when they're growing. You can do it also in late winter when the ground is not frozen. That would be a good time as well. Generally, we say not to plant during the summer because it can get really hot. We may forget to water. There may be issues along in that line. So yes, usually we say don't plant trees in the summer. You always want to consider about the root growth before you actually put a tree in the ground. Remember that the roots most of the roots don't grow below 12 inches in the topsoil. They grow outward. So avoid locations like real close to the foundation of the house or next to a driveway or concrete area, things along in that line. Just make sure they have plenty of room to be able to spread their roots out so they can have some good growth. Do a soil test. It's not uncommon for me to get soil test results coming into my office for a particular tree in the yard, and then they need to adjust the nutrients or adjust the pH. It's harder to do that once the tree is in the ground. So doing it beforehand, and then when you're taking the soil out, you can then for creating that hole, then you can add whatever nutrients or recommendations from that soil test back into that hole, and that tree will then be set for quite a while. You only want to dig the hole as deep as the soil ball as a general rule of thumb. The diameter of that is that you want it to be 2 to 3 times wider than the root ball itself. So in this picture, you can see the root ball here and the burlap and then look at the size and diameter of that hole. It doesn't look like it's 2 to 3 times wider than the root ball in that burlap. Remove the burlap and any wire that might be there. We hear things back and forth between it. Some folks say yes, keep it. Some folks say don't. I generally lean towards don't, just simply because you allow those roots more freedom to be able to grow and become more stabilized in that soil. If you have a wiring that's around that and the roots can get really big and thick, they can become girdled within that wire. So I always suggest that we take off the burlap and the wire. For the first 2 years, you want to generally make sure that you keep in touch with how much moisture that tree is actually getting. And if you had new trees planted, you definitely during the summer, hopefully you were watering those trees, especially if they're newly planted, because they need that moisture for that good root growth. Once that root growth has become truly established, the rest of that tree is going to just thrive very nicely. And when it comes to mulching, we always want to mulch in a ring. Do not mulch as a donut or a volcano. I'm sorry, I have that wrong. Mulch in a ring or as a donut, do not mulch as a volcano. So I apologize for that mistake right there, but I knew what I was talking about. So don't do a volcano. So let's look at some of the main issues as to why trees have problems when they're growing. So this picture is talking about root flare. So if no roots larger than 1/2 inch in diameter are found by probing the top 2 inches of that root ball, then you want to go ahead and remove those top 2 inches, because we want to have a root flare at the top of where it meets the ground level. So here, this is a good picture. Here's our tree. And right here, and you can see the coloration is a little bit darker than the actual roots that are coming out. So the soil has been pulled away from this tree to show you where the root flare is. So here's a root flare, there's a root flare, there's one right there. So when you plant, you want to be able to see that root flare. So a lot of the soil in a root ball may be much deeper on the top and covering up that root flare. So check to make sure where that root flare is, remove some of that soil in the soil ball at the top till you see that root flare, and then plant that so that it's level at that root flare with the level of the ground that you're putting that tree into that hole. Another issue is going to be the hole itself. A lot of people feel like as they take the soil out of that hole, then they're not going to put that exact same soil in. They want to add compost, peat moss, create their own types of soil to be able to put back into that hole, thinking they're going to help those roots to grow better. And you know what? They most certainly will. But what's going to happen is that as these roots start to grow outward, as the tree gets taller, they're going to go, oh, I don't like this soil out here as much, which is the native soil, compared to the soil that you may have adjusted in the hole itself. So chances are those roots are going to go there, and then they're going to start girdling around in a circle, and that can essentially strangulate the actual tree itself, and the nutrients won't be able to, and the water won't be able to go up. So can you adjust the soil that you've taken out? Sure, go ahead and do that if you so choose, but do not add more than 20% of new type of amendments to that soil that you've taken out. Otherwise, it's going to have a tendency where those roots are going to just go and continue to grow in a circle. We want them to grow outward into that native soil that they're in. So another issue, and this is one that my neighbor had and asked me to come over and look at it. So what they did is they built up a volcano with trees that were in their front yard. And the trees are starting to show a lot of stress. They're not doing very nicely. They're very beautiful trees that bloom in the spring, and they really want to save them. So what I told them is that, first of all, they made a mistake by planting it and doing a volcano mulch around it. And so this just goes to show you, and you can see from the shovel, the spade here, how deep this actually is from the ground level. And so we dug away from the top up here, and this is what we saw. So you can see the root flare is down here. And if you notice how deep it is from here to here, oops, sorry guys, let me go back. From here to here, it looks like it's a number of inches. So the root flare definitely is below that mulch line. And so what they've done is they've created an issue where it's going to girdle. So here again is a picture. You can see the root flares down here. And here I have a spade or a hand trowel, so you can actually see how deep it is. So here's the different coloration right here. This whole section was covered up with soil and mulch, and there's the root flare. So that's one of the issues that's happening there. And then as we look at it, and we were pulling more of the soil away to follow those roots down, and again, you can see the hand trowel, so you can see how thick these different roots are. What we noticed up close around the trunk itself is these roots were starting to grow in a circle all the way around. You can't really tell here, but if pulling this particular root away from the trunk, that root is embedded already into the trunk of that tree. And remember that the flow of the nutrients and the water going up and down as this tree continues to grow, this root right here is going to continue to get bigger and thicker and embed itself further into that trunk, strangulizing that actual water and nutrients from going up and down within that tree. The other thing that you can see is this root right here. We pulled it up, and actually what it was doing is it was starting to go around in a circle. And so what happens is the roots come, and you can see a root right here. Notice what it did. If it starts to come out, it goes into the air, and roots don't grow in the air. So what it did is it grew so that it could go back into that soil and that volcano mulch, and it actually is starting to grow around this tree, and it's going to stay within this area of the tree. And so you can see the distance here and how steep this berm, this volcano, the soil, the mulch is actually on that angle, and how deep that is. And so that is, when I see that, I just always want to cringe, because I'm like, I know that tree is going to have issues as it continues to grow. So just some pictures here of some experiences that I've seen to help you to understand how to actually plant trees so that you don't have these kinds of issues in the future.
All right, thank you, Debbie. Okay, the next thing we are going to talk about is fall webworm, and they are definitely out and about, so let's talk a little bit about them. Okay, fall webworm is an insect pest of all kinds of trees. They feed on over 100 different species. The caterpillars can heavily or completely defoliate trees. The adults emerge in the spring after overwintering as pupa underground or in leaf litter. They lay their eggs, and they lay their eggs in these hair-like covered masses. And I don't know if you can see this picture here on the very bottom, but the underside of the leaf, that is an egg mass, and it's white, it kind of looks fuzzy, furry. So that's something that you can kind of scout for, throughout the summer. If you see these egg masses, get rid of them. And they are typically on the underside of leaves. Once they hatch, the caterpillars will start to spin a web, and they feed on all the foliage inside of that web, and then they enlarge the web to enclose more foliage. So that's kind of a protection mechanism. They're inside of that web while they're feeding, so nothing can get after them. And so here's what fall webworm looks like. I'm sure everyone has seen it. Very, very common. Fortunately, you don't have to do anything. It won't kill the tree, even though it defoliates a lot of the tree. It won't kill the tree, so that is a good thing. As far as control, if you want to control them, if you want to do something about them, you can open up the webs with some kind of a sharp object, including your hand. They don't sting or bite. Knock out the caterpillars, and you can step on them or just open up the web so that birds and other things can get in there and eat the caterpillars. We don't really recommend pruning out the limbs that have webworm in it. That's just really not necessary. It's unnecessary pruning, and we certainly don't recommend burning. I know that's been a kind of a thing that people have done in the past. You can really run into some problems there. You can catch the whole tree on fire, so don't recommend burning. Insecticides won't penetrate the webbing very well, so we don't really recommend those either. So do scouting for the egg masses if you are concerned about them. Open up the web so predators can get in there and eat the caterpillars. But again, you don't have to do anything. It can be unsightly, but they rarely kill the trees, and most trees are getting ready to drop their leaves anyway. So that is a good thing. Okay, so that is all I had on fall webworm, and next Debbie is going to do our horticulture terminology.
Okay, so the word for today is etoliation. So do we have excess or elongation of the root system of a plant, fast growing growth due to over-fertilization, or leggy or tall growth caused by insufficient sunlight? And the poll is up, and so we're looking to see what answers are coming in from you guys. And they're coming in, and it looks really good. Are there a few more of you that want to put in an answer? Only 43% of you have participated. Give you another second or two. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. And 50% of you say it's C, 39% say it's A, and 11% say that it's B. So I'm going to go ahead and let you know the answer is, and I always have a hard time pronouncing this word, so I'm going to look at my little cheat sheet, etiolation. Etiolation. Oops, and it's supposed to be etiolation up there. I had a busy morning, guys. Sorry, it's not a droop. Etiolation. Oh, I'm even saying it wrong again. Etiolation. So essentially what that is a weak, pale, or a leggy looking, really tall growth caused by insufficient sunlight. So here we have a picture. It shows you the plants and actually with good sunlight. And these are the exact same plants as what's on the left side, but they have been shown to have less light and less growth. So this kind of a term is really important when we're growing our seeds in the beginning of the season for our gardens. So you have a new term now that you could use with some of your friends and other gardening friends so that you can come across as being really smart. And so it's Etiolation. Donna, will you pronounce this word for me correctly, please?
It's etiolation.
There you go. So thank you, Donna.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. Okay, so our last topic for today will be about squash leaves. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on with squash leaves, with leaves of cucurbits. You know, is it normal? Is it not normal? So Katie is going to tell us about that.
All right, let me get my screen shared here. All right, hopefully you're seeing the right one.
Yes.
Okay, so I have two different squash leaves here, and if you want to type in the chat box which you think is a disease and which you think is natural to the squash. So you can type in the chat box A or B. So I will tell you that one is powdery mildew, and powdery mildew is a common squash disease. And hopefully, I hope some people are typing in the chat while I'm chatting. So powdery mildew, common in many different kinds of squash and across other plants also. But A on the left is powdery mildew. So you can see those little spots, and that is the start of powdery mildew, and that can cover the entire leaf. Depending on when it happens during the growing season and what the weather does, it can be worse. And if it happens late in the season, it may not be a big deal, but if it happens early in the season, it can cause some real damage. And B is actually natural flecking in that squash leaf. There are many different kinds of squash. And that flecking in that might look like it could possibly be an issue is actually natural to that particular plant. And I believe this one was a cushaw squash. And you can kind of see that it is very angular in the veins. And also, along those lines in the cucurbit family, this is a watermelon. And you see lots of yellow spots on those leaves. And those yellow spots look like they could be a disease issue. Well, actually, in this case, it is Moon and Stars watermelon. So the spots are on the watermelon. It gets its name, Moon and Stars. And the leaves also have those yellow spots. So in horticulture, I kind of always say there are exceptions to the rule. And so figuring out what is normal for an individual plant can really help you out in thinking about what might be a disease problem. And that's all I've got.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Debbie to close this out for today.
So thank you everyone for presenting, and sorry guys for my mistakes on my PowerPoints today. I apologize for that. Just want to let you know that as we do this via Zoom live, we also do it on YouTube live. So if you are in a location where you have a phone and you don't have access to an internet or whatever the situation might be, you can always go back and watch it live via Zoom, or it's recorded. So you can go ahead and see the different recordings that are there. We also have, from one week to the next, we also do snippets. So we that do presentations will vote each week on what we think is timely and a good presentation. And so those snippets are going to be looking like what these are up above. And those are just those little short answers to some of those questions. And then if you go into youtube.com, MUIPM, that stands for Missouri University Integrated Pest Management. And so that's where you could find this. And then in the future, we have 2 more. Next week and the following week, we'll have the garden hour. And then in October, we're moving to once a month since we don't have as much growing in the gardens or in our landscapes. But we will start in October doing the 3rd Wednesday of the month. So October 14th. So go ahead and mark your calendars so that you don't forget from one week to the next. However, you'll still continue to get an email. Katie sends that out each morning for the garden hours. So check your emails on those Wednesday mornings and we'll kind of go from there. And then if you're interested in saving some of the resources that are in the chat box, go to your chat, look for those 3 dots, and it might be in a different location on your particular Zoom application. But if you click on those 3 dots, right click on that, I believe, and you can save the chat to your own computer and you can grab those resources later if you haven't grabbed them as of yet. And then I'll go ahead and put this back up for you. So if you didn't grab an email address of any one of us to ask questions to, by all means, please go ahead and grab our email address. I believe there was a question or 2 in the chat box. So one of us will probably, if you want to email us those questions, one of us, then we'll be happy to answer that question for you, because I don't know if we've been able to grab that or not. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and sign off for now. Jared, please leave it up for just a minute or 2 so someone can grab an email address if they had something in the chat box they would like for someone to answer, so they can do that. Otherwise, we'll see you all next week.